there's a couple of things to think about. One is, as you said, it's the duration of those symptoms. So certainly if someone's been experiencing these symptoms for over 3 months, then I would say that that's a definite red flag and that they would, need to
3
speak
months.
to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is frequency as well. So how often are they having these events? So for example, is it that they've had 1 or 2 flashbacks? Or is it that they're having flashbacks daily, multiple times a week?
Right.
And then the other thing when we think about kind of frequency as well is that, I suppose, is the impact as well, or the level of impact that that's having on someone's ability to function and on their quality of life as well. So if someone is finding that this is having an impact on things like their relationships, their ability to leave the house, their ability to bond with their baby, those kind of things. And again, that is a sign that, things might need, kind of more attention.
Welcome to the Motherhood Clinic, a podcast about caring for mothers after childbirth, led by clinical experience and real life stories. If you're a new mum and ever asked yourself, is what I'm going through normal? Should I be worried? Or who should I ask for help? This podcast is for you. It's for anyone navigating those early weeks, months, or even years after having a baby. Each episode brings together voices from across the motherhood journey, from clinicians, experts, and mothers from all walks of life. We're here to help you feel more empowered in your unique motherhood journey. We believe in a better start to motherhood.
This is the second episode. We've just talked about awareness and understanding with Dr. Emma Thornton. Now we're going to really focus in this conversation over the next half an hour around what you can do about it. And I think there's a few elements to this conversation. And then Emma, I'd love to hand over to you to kind of set the scene for this discussion. So we'll talk about, number one, how do you recognize or identify you've got birth trauma? We did speak about that in the previous conversation, but let's really outline, what does that look like, and how do I, as a mum or as a carer or partner, how do I identify that I have a birth trauma to deal with? Then we'll talk about how do we make the best of the current system? How do we maximize the support we need and get from the current system? And then I'd love to delve into what Cocoon's doing, because that's why I'm talking to you, Emma, and the fantastic innovation you're doing. What is it you're hoping to build and deliver to address this space? And then lastly, we'll talk about what can mums do personally, even outside of paid options, etc. What are some of the simple tips and guidance that every mum or carer or partner can do to help work through birth trauma? Anything I'm missing there, Emma?
No, sounds good to me.
Yeah. So why don't we set the scene with just understanding, how do we recognize birth trauma? What are some of the key things that people should be aware of to start with?
Yeah, so I suppose kind of as we introduced on the first episode, birth trauma is that physical or psychological injury as a result of a birth experience, which can have an impact on their health or well-being, and that can present in different ways. Some of the features that we talked about last time were people feeling anxious, and not only anxious, but sometimes this feeling of what we call arousal or hypervigilance. So really struggling to relax and always feeling like they're on high alert, or that kind of impending sense of doom feeling. The next, it comes under what we call reimagining birth, and often that's in the form of flashbacks to the birth, but it can sometimes be nightmares as well. People can become triggered, whether or not that's through conversations about birth or more generally. It could be sounds, smells, other sensations that they can relate to their birth. So, for example, it could be the beeping noise that you associate with the CTG machine, for example, something that sounds similar to that. And then that kind of feeds into this feeling of avoidance as well. So trying to avoid any situations that remind you of the birth. So it could be that you're trying to avoid any healthcare environments. It could be that you're trying to avoid speaking to particular people that maybe, you think you might end up talking about the birth to, for example. And then other things would be effects on mood as well. So we know that there are a number of people that have birth trauma that go on to develop postnatal depression.
Hmm.
So that could be low mood. Often with birth trauma, there's these feelings of what we call self-blame or self-guilt as well. Um, and sometimes as well, women can feel quite what we call emotionally numb or feeling quite
Mm.
detached as well. So they're often the symptoms that are associated with that trauma or that distress. Having a lot of those symptoms or kind of all of those symptoms could mean that a woman is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or
Mm.
birth associated post-traumatic stress
Got it.
disorder. So
Great, Emma. I think those are some really helpful and specific symptoms. I want to dig a little deeper on some of those. And, we've talked about a number of symptoms and, gauging based on the number that you've got. Is there also, I guess, within those symptoms, there's probably a level or severity point, and there's also a time point, which is how severe are each of those individual symptoms, and then how long have they been going on for? So can you talk a bit more about, are there any clear red lines where you're saying, look, if it's been going for this long or this kind of severity, and how do you, I guess part of the difficulty is knowing what level is this? Is this a level 1 or a
yeah,
level 10? Like, can you talk to me a bit more about those aspects?
yeah. So I think there's a couple of things to think about. One is, as you said, it's the duration of those symptoms. So
Mm.
certainly, if someone's been experiencing these symptoms for over 3 months, then I
Okay,
would say that that's a definite red flag, and that they would, need to
3
speak to
months.
somebody.
Hmm.
Um, the other thing is frequency as well. So how often are they
Right.
having these events? So, for example, is it that they've had one or two flashbacks, or
Hmm.
is it that they're having flashbacks daily, multiple times a week?
Right.
And then the other thing when we think about um, kind of frequency as well is that I suppose is the impact as well, or the level of impact that that's having on someone's ability to function and on their quality of life as well. So if someone is finding that this is having an impact on things like their relationships, their ability to leave the house, their
Mm.
ability to bond with their baby, those kind of things. And again, that is a sign that, things might need, kind of more attention, than someone might first feel directly after the birth. But what I would say is if anyone has got any of these symptoms, and they feel like they need support, then there is no, there's no kind of point where we say you have to have this for this long before you can seek support. If someone is
Yes.
struggling, then, the door should always be open to speak to us.
Great. Thank you, Emma. I think that's really clear. And there's a number of dimensions that you've called out that help to, I guess, triangulate, right, whether this needs doing. So you mentioned the number of symptoms, frequency, duration, the level of impact, and then severity. But I think, as you absolutely rightly call out, which is you don't have to, and you don't want these things to get to a red line before you have to react to it. The point is, the earlier you deal with this in the right way, hopefully the less work that needs to be done to resolve those, because obviously the worse it gets, the harder it is to therefore backtrack and work your way through those. So I think that's hopefully a really clear message for anyone listening in. Um, what would you say to those partners and carers, those that are, oftentimes looking in on the mother? How can they identify and help, mothers?
I think it's being aware of some of the signs that we've mentioned, but also thinking about kind of from the outside looking in, do they look kind of panicked or triggered when the birth is
Mm.
is being mentioned, or when they're seeing something related to the birth? Are they, emotionally kind of withdrawing or shutting down? People who know you best will probably be able to recognize if that's happening. And
Mm.
then, is there a reluctance to talk about the birth as well? Is that person shutting
Yes.
down that conversation? Are they not
Mm.
wanting
Mm.
to kind of speak about that when you're raising it as well? And then just those general kind of things that you mentioned, are they seeming more anxious? Are they not wanting to go and see friends or family? Are they not wanting to leave the house? Have you got concerns, that they don't but they mentioned that they don't feel like they're bonding, or it feels like they're struggling to to bond with the baby, those kind of things. And just, I
Mm,
suppose, if you recognize those things, then um, offering that support and opening up the floor for that conversation, to see, are they struggling, and do they want your help
mm.
in that.
Yeah. It's a challenging one, isn't it? Because again, oftentimes, and come back to the awareness and understanding conversation we had first, is sometimes you might not know you're going through this, right? You whether it's other walks of life, you can go through these experiences and not really fully appreciate, actually, this is happening to me, and they might need someone else to step in. And that can be challenging, right? Um, so I think it's just, I wanted to raise awareness, and for us to, I think there's some really clear guidance that you've given, on how we can all support each other, through that kind of time.
Yeah, and the
Um,
other thing is
mm,
there are some kind of validated scoring tools as well for
great.
women. So there's
Okay.
the City Birth Trauma Scale as well that women can complete, and that's available on their website. That's a free tool, and there
Mm,
is, most health visitors as well will recommend the Edinburgh postnatal depression score as well. The birth trauma scale isn't universally used. That's why I kind of mentioned that as a separate in the website. But you know, just to touch on the fact that the health visitor is there as a resource as well. So trying to use them as well as a person to
perfect.
direct you to services, and to provide that help as well.
Excellent. Thank you. And we'll put links to those in the description as well. So, let's lead on from that conversation about who can help in the system as it is currently. You've already mentioned, one instance of where others in the system can help support. What other things can the system provide, and how can mothers and anyone caring for mothers get the best out of the current system? So we talked a bit about the 6 to 8 week check. Um, let's talk more about how can we best make use of those current resources that are available.
Yeah, definitely. So as I've just kind of touched on, there's the health visitor, and the health visitor typically takes over from your community midwife at
Hmm.
around, I think they can have you normally in their workload community midwife up until about day 10 postnatal. So
Hmm.
initially you will have your community midwife there as
Hmm.
support, and you will come under kind of the postnatal ward for that time.
Hmm.
You can then, once that care has been taken over by the health visitor, use the health visitor as kind of someone to help guide you in support as well. Often the first person they will direct you to is your GP.
Hmm.
Um, and you can go to your GP obviously outside that kind of 6 to 8 week remit. That is someone that you can reach out to at any point. And if you're going to your GP, one of the things that I would suggest is sometimes it's quite helpful to write things down before you come,
Yes.
because sometimes I think you
Great.
can feel quite overwhelmed in that moment.
Mm-mm.
We know a lot of people don't come to the GP because of there's feelings of stigma or shame around
Hmm.
coming to the GP around that time period after having a baby and saying that you're struggling with your mental health. We know about 50% of women will not present because of that worry of, kind of through stigma, shame. There are other reasons as well. It might be that they've previously had a bad experience in that healthcare setting, etc. But I would really encourage women to utilize their GP, write things down. If you're worried about going on your own, go with your partner or a supportive friend. Um, and make sure, as I think we said in the last episode, about advocating for yourself, and, even, really kind of stressing, the fact that you're basically what you think might be going on as well. If you've completed some of these tools before you go as well, you can bring those with you and say,
Mm.
I'm worried that it could be this, and sometimes that can be helpful as well.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, I would say the GP's first port of call, and then often the GP will then be able to refer to other services. So, depending, I suppose, on those things we mentioned earlier, so depending on the frequency, the level of severity, it could be that there is a referral to kind of more specialist perinatal mental health services, or it could be referral to kind of sometimes general services are used because they can sometimes be quicker to access. So, for example, it
Yeah.
could be general talking therapies,
Mm.
or general CBT. In an ideal world, women would be able to access more specialised psychological support for themselves. Um, the other thing is there are charities and third sector organisations that women can look at, for example, Pandas, Birth Trauma Association as well. There's the Maternal Mental Health Alliance. There's lots of other um, third sector organisations that are doing a fantastic job as well. And then there are birth reflection services as well. And some women, as we kind of mentioned earlier, may be identified kind of through the postnatal ward or through the maternity service as someone who needs a specific debrief or referral, just from the nature of their, I suppose, birth. But the other thing, I suppose, is if you feel like you're needing a debrief, is maybe trying to kind of speak to someone about that as well and seeing if that can be arranged.
Great. I think there's a great set of resources that we'll make sure that we, again, link into. The key point that I'll take through is there are resources out there. And it's, again, that awareness. I'm always amazed and saddened by that 50% figure, the idea that nearly, half of people don't present when they need to. What assurance would you give to that mother that doesn't want to say how they really feel for fear that they're going to take their baby away? What do you say to that person to reassure them that, look, we need to help you, or that we're
Yeah,
here to help? What do you say?
I would say that it is never someone's intention to try and separate a mum from her baby. That is not, that is not what someone is going out to intend to do when you come in for that consultation. The main part of that consultation is to get you the support that you need. And
Hmm.
I think, unfortunately, the level of awareness and education around some aspects of perinatal mental health needs to be improved. So, for example, intrusive thoughts. Lots of
Mm-hmm.
new mums have intrusive thoughts. I would say, that could be intrusive thoughts about them accidentally harming the baby. So, for example, dropping the baby when they're walking downstairs, etc. I don't think it's something that anybody ever really speaks about, the fact that they have these intrusive thoughts, but they're really, really common. And I think it's important to have that openness around those kind of things to enable women to come and speak to us. We want people to come forward if they are struggling, and it is about getting you the support and and to help you. I can understand this anxiety around people feeling like you say, will they think I'm not fit enough to look after my baby? And I would say, as I've just mentioned, that is not the aim. That is as far away from what somebody wants as possible, and services will always try and keep mums and babies together in any situation. The main aim is to get you that support,
Yeah.
and to get you it on basically the best way for you to access it as well. And so, like I was saying in the previous episode, trying to work around you. So understanding your life, are you able to make these appointments? What's your childcare like? What's your transport like? So ideally, if there are other barriers, and it's not just that worry about, oh, will I have my child taken away from me? But also, like, I can't do the school pickup if it's an afternoon appointment for my other children. Those kind of things. We need to try and remove those barriers so that women do want
Yeah.
to come and see us.
Yeah. And that postpartum period is such a challenging time, right? I mean, you talk about intrusive thoughts. It's one of those elements, and I'm glad you called out that in context. What is the aim of that? Is really to help. But the idea is oftentimes, again, particularly after trauma, those immediate things that happen and your thought process and your mindset afterwards is particularly fragile. A year later on, you're like, how could I have even thought of that, right? And I think it's only looking back in retrospect, you're like, when you're in it, it's very hard to be objective as to, what you're going through. And that's why I think it's very important, as you said, to be reassured as what the health system is there to do. The health system is there to support mums and babies and get the best possible outcome. And it's being aware whether it's you as the mother or as the carer, to say, look, this is the best way that we can make things better, right? As opposed to, the what is it, the doom and despair way. And we hear this a lot. This happens, and you've called up that this happens to a lot of people. So if you are feeling this way, if it's any consolation, it happens to a lot of other mums as well. And so I think if that provides some reassurance that this happens to a lot of other people, it's not just you. And two, it's the reason why you should really get some support. So I think it's just hopefully that we can elevate that message to other mums. I also want to turn the conversation now to obviously what you're building and Cocoon, which I think is there's some great stuff that you're doing to really go beyond what the health system already provides. So talk to me as well about the focus for Cocoon. What is it you're trying to do? Obviously you're passionate about this space, Emma, and I'd love to really help promote what Cocoon is going to be about and what that's aiming to do for the business.
Thank you very much. So I suppose Cocoon was born out of my frustrations that some women are really struggling to access specialist support for birth trauma in a timely manner. So there was a Freedom of Information request, I think in 2023, that showed in some areas in the country, women were waiting up to 19 months for specialist support. Now that is an anomaly, that is not the norm. But one of the complaints or one of the things that is fed back is that, and this was again in the birth trauma inquiry, is the lack of support and also the time that it can sometimes take to get that specialist provision.
Yes.
Now, we touched on briefly that there are other barriers sometimes to women being able to access support, and that can be childcare. So it could be, sometimes face-to-face support is a lengthy appointment, and that woman might struggle for childcare with a newborn baby or other children. It could be that it's a transport issue. So if you don't drive or you're struggling to get there, as we said, with a small baby. The other thing is that sometimes, for example, if things are delivered online, it can feel very generic and not personalised to that mum. So a lot of support services that women are directed to try and combat those issues that I've just mentioned are very generalist and they're not specific to the perinatal mental health space. So
yes,
we could see a gap there for a digitally delivered solution to try and help women. What I wanted to build was something that a woman could pick up at 3:00 in the morning when she's breastfeeding, get her phone out for 20 minutes and, work through one of these modules, what we call micro modules, or that she's, waiting for a baby to wake up from a nap while she's making a bottle, and she can just sit there and do a couple of the exercises while the kettle is, or the baby prep machine, which I think a lot of mums use now, is doing the bottle. So just trying to fit it in more around a new mum, like a new mum's life, really. So the platform includes trauma-focused CBT, digital delivered CBT, and also what we call an AI birth story analysis. The AI birth story analysis enables a woman to write out her birth story. So it enables her to write out her own experience of birth. And we know even doing that in itself, there is evidence to show that that is therapeutic and it's healing. And so that woman then is able to then have an analysis done on her story to make sure that the support is individualized and tailored to her, and to pick out the key themes or areas that she is struggling with. So we're in the process of building that out and kind of fundraising to make sure that we get the right people involved. because we're very keen as well to make this available in multiple languages, because we know that, for example, not speaking English as a first language is a risk factor for birth trauma. Being
Hmm.
from a different culture is a risk factor for birth trauma. We know kind of
Yes.
physical trauma as well, being from Southeast Asian background, your risk of kind of obstetric anal sphincter injuries is higher. So there's
Mm.
a lot of things that we need to consider. And we're very keen to co-design with people with lived experience to make sure that this actually provides solutions that are going to help people, because that's ultimately what we want to do.
Yeah. That's incredible. There's so much within that that really resonates with everything we're hearing. There's a couple of points I'll come back to. I love the micro learnings, because if there's one thing that mums and parents don't have is time, right?
Yeah.
And but I do think that there is still opportunity, as you said, there's micro moments where all those kind of compounding small, atomic habits, right, stuff, where they can
Yeah.
really help to deliver some really significant value. And it's all and as you say, it's about how can the mum and the parents feel more empowered to deal with their own situation. Obviously, we've called out the place of clinicians and professionals to support, but there's a healthy amount that the person going through this can do for themselves. And I think it's, as you're saying, it's more about the accessibility. I still remember, I can't remember how many photocopies of papers we got in this folder that we put somewhere in the bookshelf that we never ever saw again. And now with the tools that we have, it's making that so much more accessible, whether it's just as simple as a translated version, or just like, from all the research that if you're inclined to read it, here are the 2 or 3 action points that are relevant to you that you need to be doing at this point. And that's so powerful. And I'm glad that that's something that's that you're actively working on. Um, the other point was this idea of writing your own narrative, which is so powerful. Actually, our very first podcast that we did was with a friend of mine called Charlotte Brown, and she loves to write. And I asked her, well, what was the value of writing for you? And it was exactly as you said, you start to take control of your own narrative. And so much of the power in doing that is that you can write your own story, not to make up your own story, as nice as that is, but it's really to understand your story. And it's really about the interpretation and the understanding of your story that is yours, as opposed to, being told by someone else. So that I think that's a really incredibly powerful tool that I've heard
Yeah.
several people speak to. Yeah.
And we have the capability within the platform for the woman to either send her
Mm,
her screening results, so the questionnaires I mentioned earlier, they're included, but
mm,
either her screening results, or if she wishes to
mm,
forward her birth story analysis report to a healthcare professional. We understand that some women won't want to, and from kind of some of our research in the past, we know that some women, particularly those that are maybe pursuing litigation and things like that, they
mm.
might feel kind of that reluctance to maybe share that kind of information with
I
other
understand.
professionals. We understand that. Um, but the option is there. For example, if you're going to an appointment and you think, I'm going to write down my concerns, but I'm also going to take my report because it says that, I've struggled with this, and this. And the other thing is, although it's a birth story analysis, it's from, the way that it's structured is it's from day one. So kind of the
Mm,
pregnancy, how was the pregnancy, postnatally. So it's that full spectrum. So we can make sure if there's any issues that have cropped up,
yes.
that we're making sure they're not missed. And sometimes it can feed in, we know that certain women will be at more increased risk of trauma, particularly women that have had birth trauma in the past, or, they might have have other traumatic experiences as well. And so we can try and screen for those as well.
Good, good. And I guess part of it is marrying those two sides of the same coin, where, on the one side, you are tracking the facts and the figures and the data of what happened and the events. But then equally, there's the experience of those events, which can be, as you're saying, as valuable to the mother to understand actually how am I interpreting, experiencing all these things. That is important to really, you have to have a handle on that in order to start to resolve those and to, you know, to I guess to heal, right? I mean, that's the only way to really work through those kind of events, right?
Yeah. And we will know that, there are
Yeah.
certain themes that will come up again and
Mm,
again. So, for example, not feeling listened to, lack of
mm,
control, fear around, the safety of the baby or the health of the baby. There'll be frequent things that come up, but there will be unique
mm,
things that do come up to that woman. And the other thing is, I suppose, to mention is we know that this will be suitable probably for women that have got mild to moderate symptoms. There will be some
mm.
women that will need more intensive support than this. They will potentially need face-to-face support. They might need more specialised support for birth trauma. So, for example, EMDR, which is a way of using eye movements to reduce the risk of kind of reduce the symptoms of PTSD. So there's an awareness that we know that this won't work necessarily for everybody, but even as an interim tool for some of those people that are stuck on waiting lists for that more
Yes.
intensive support, we see that this is potentially valuable for them too.
Yeah, that's great. And I was saying, I think you're right to call out, again, expectations of when the system can support and what can be done in between that. Because there's so oftentimes, you want to feel like you have a level of control over your situation and not just at the behest of when the system can fit you in. So I think just stepping back, I think we've covered quite a few areas of things that, mums and carers and parents can do, whether it's writing your narrative, whether it's those micro learning moments, whether it's making the mess of those checks, whether it's the health visitor, the community midwife. Is there anything else that we've missed that you would recommend that mums do to deal with birth trauma that we should talk about, or is that have we kind of covered hopefully everything that within that you're aware of in your repertoire?
Yeah, I think we've covered the majority of things. I think there's other things, and there are things that we're including within the resource bank for Cocoon, kind of
Mm,
for example, practicing mindfulness, thinking about
mm-hmm,
breathing exercises, for example, box breathing if people are struggling with anxiety, general things, trying to get outdoors,
mm-hmm.
walking, going for walks, trying to engage in things that you enjoy. As I touched on as well, kind of with the birth story analysis, it's things as well around journaling. Some people can find that quite helpful as well. So um, there's lots of, I suppose, different ways of trying to look after yourself in that respect as well. But ultimately, my biggest call to action would be that if you're struggling, you can reach out to a healthcare professional, and that is what we are there for. We are there to support you, and to direct you to more specialised support if you do need it.
Fantastic. Well, I think you've answered my last question actually was, we talk a lot about a better start to motherhood and what does that mean? A better start can be any number of things to any new mums, but given the conversation around birth trauma, would that be therefore, your response to that? So what does a better start to motherhood look like for you? Is it about reaching out to professionals? What would your response to that question be?
Um, I suppose advocating for yourself,
Hmm.
and if you are struggling, seeking help, and then I suppose the way that health professionals can help is by asking the question, um, how are you doing? Asking that question more frequently, as we mentioned on previous episodes.
Excellent. Emma, this has been a wealth of information. Hopefully anyone listening in can gain a lot from these two conversations, one around, what is birth trauma, but equally what can be done about it. So thank you for your time. Again, I'd love to please promote where people can find more about you and Cocoon. And because I think, again, the work he does is really incredible. So please share where people can find out more.
Yeah, so you can find more on our website, which is mycocoon.health, and we have a waiting list there for anyone who's interested. And then if anyone wants to kind of follow our founder's journey, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm Dr. Emma Thornton on LinkedIn.
Dr. Emma Thornton, thank you very much for joining us on the Motherhood Clinic. Love to chat again. But
Yeah,
all thank you.
thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.